Alright.
Cool.
I'm Jared Shumway, and I'm here to talk about movies because movies are really awesome, but kind of underrated, and a lot of people don't know that you can actually take some movies seriously. And I think part of the problem is the lack of clarity that there are different kinds of movies that exist. So I'm not talking about action movies as awesome as John Wick was, or movies that are just about a story like King's Speech, or just about cool stuff like Edge of Tomorrow and time travel, or Lord of the Rings and a cool fantasy universe. I'm talking about movies that are cinematic, or have a certain literary element to them that can teach you things about humanity or the human condition or about yourself as you watch them. But these kinds of movies require interpretation, which is this two-way interaction between the movie and the viewer of the movie. And interpretation is really important, and it implicitly happens as you watch in a movie and kind of build the narrative of what's happening. And it kind of arises from the world of the film intersecting with the world of the viewer, which means that interpretations exist for each individual and are different. Interpretations become more explicit when you reflect on a movie or when you discuss it, but they're always happening and it's usually implicit. Also, the act of interpreting is implicitly valuable, even if what you kind of decide happened in the movie isn't important. So a bad interpretation is authorial intent. This kind of comes from trying to figure out what the creator of the movie meant. But a lot of people don't realize that art, as soon as the creator releases it, it's kind of divorced from the creator's intentions, and you can think whatever you want about it. So the author doesn't matter. Similarly, art isn't a puzzle to be solved, and there's no one true interpretation, and thinking in that way just kind of limits what you can get and the kind of depth of experience you can have from interpreting a movie. So there's also non-interpretation, which is just kind of literally looking at what happens in a movie and thinking that's what it means. So if you ever heard somebody say, "The Lion King encourages fratricide," or some more subtle version of this, totally missing the point. So you might be asking, but why movies? And I think a lot of the reason is the length of movies is just really great. It's really approachable, even to people like us who have very little free time. You consume the entire narrative in one sitting. And the length of movies confines the movie to, a single theme or two closely related themes, which is really, really useful when you're trying to interpret what a movie means. Also, visual and audio mediums are really, really digestible by humans, which also makes it really great. So let's talk about Inception, because I think a lot of people miss the point. Does the top fall at the end of Inception? It doesn't really matter. And indeed, it doesn't fall, and it also doesn't not fall. It just stops existing as soon as the movie is over, which means you kind of have to choose what you think. And it's an important point that the universe created in movies stops existing once the movie's over and never existed before the movie was being experienced. But the top isn't important anyway, because my favorite interpretation of Inception is that the entire movie takes place inside of a dream. And it's actually Cobb's dream, or his wife's, but when Mabel kills herself, she's actually escaping into reality, but the movie beginning to end, all a dream. But this is a totally self-serving interpretation for this talk, because I think movies are like dreams. The contents only exist while they're being experienced, they have their own internal rules, they're up for interpretation, and sometimes they make a lot of emotional sense, even if there was no author involved in a dream. So a good example is the movie 500 Days of Summer, which if you guys haven't seen it, you really, really should. I watched this with somebody the other day and they're like, this movie's dumb. Like, the main character didn't learn anything. And other people interpret it as like, no, he learns a super critical lesson about relationships. Also, the ending of this movie is really polarizing. Some people see it really negatively as like indicative of an endless cycle of false happiness and then unhappiness. Or other people see it as like a hopeful fate for the character. And which way you land says a lot about how you view relationships and what you believe. So let's talk about the best movie of 2014, Birdman. It, like a lot of cinematic movies, uses intentional ambiguity to force a viewer to make an interpretation. And the ending has tons of interpretations. It's also a movie that begs to be taken literally, but that's a trap. And a good point about subtlety, movies like Good Will Hunting, some of the characters like literally deliver the theme of the movie as a line of dialogue. And Birdman makes you think it's doing that, but that's kind of a trap, and the deeper theme comes when you realize that all the characters have different competing ideas. So why is this important? Engineering's great, but while you're here, you really owe it to yourself to learn something about yourself, and movies, how you interpret them, and what interpretation you land on are a great avenue for doing that. So if you want some advice, watch a lot of movies. There's lots of good lists like the Golden Tomatoes, or the Oscar nominees. And be charitable when you're viewing movies. Don't try to nitpick them. Go in expecting to get something valuable out of them. Also, discuss what you think and seek other people's interpretations.